Welcome to another edition of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. Well, we all know about the culture wars and efforts by some to cancel and deplatform others with whom they disagree. But what's the connection to our economic health and future? Today, we discuss the hit on Canada's innovation economy with Dr. Pat Kambhampati. He is the Associate Professor of Chemistry at McGill University in Montreal. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's an honor to have you on the program. I guess the first thing to do is to tell our audience about this grant application, which started the controversy, and that'll set the right framework for the discussion.
Well, I will say that I had two grant applications in the last 1 year. The first one was denied and rejected without scientific peer review, only due to equity, diversity, and inclusion. That happened exactly 1 year ago. Then about a month ago, I had my second recent federal grant application rejected on EDI grounds. In the second case, it turns out they will enable me to reapply, provided I completely overhaul my EDI section. So the take-home message is the EDI section is the first hoop that I have to pass through, that we all have to pass through as scientists in order to have our science actually gauged on its own merits.
So just walk our audience a little bit through this, this diversity and inclusion requirement now. Obviously, this is not new, but it is relatively new. Just unpack what that means for the grant applicants.
Well, for the better part of the 20th century, at least in the Western world outside of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, government-funded science agencies, and science agencies distributed those funds to scientists based upon the science, and that was the end of it. In the last 2 years, the federal agencies, both in Canada and America, and I believe also in UK, have begun to ask for EDI criteria, social engineering criteria. And in the past 1 year, those criteria became more than just recommended or suggested, but they became absolutely necessary and arguably more important than the science of the proposal itself. All of this has taken place in the last 1 or 2 years.
So obviously, I want to know how you felt about that, because you're a person who, I guess, has lived a life of diversity.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. So walk us through your response to that.
Well, my response was absolutely shock. And I talk about this with my colleagues, and my colleagues who have also, shall we say, had very, off the beaten path experiences, at the very least with race, with identity, with nationality, with religion, whatever it might have. And certainly I've been someone who has not fit into the milieu, having been a recent immigrant to the United States in the 1970s. And then at that time, you can play the part of many, many races and roles of people. So I've been able to see how things transpire, and that caused me to view people as individuals, to be an egalitarian, to live as Martin Luther King tried to teach us how to live. And those are the things that we're forgetting about now. So what's happening now is that we are supposed to view each other only as not as individuals, but only as groups. And this is the exact opposite of what I've actually tried to do in my whole life. And I'm not alone in that, where you try to rise above groupthink. You try to rise above identity politics and view people as they are.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that struck me when I read about this story was, this is no offense to our friends in the social sciences, but you're not a social scientist, you're not a political scientist, you're not a sociologist, you're a professor of chemistry, so which is pure science. It's hard science. So this is one of the things that I found interesting about this case, is that it's kind of seeping out of the social sciences into areas where I think we would, when you look at mRNA research or some of these other things, that you want the best people.
That's exactly the point that we need to worry about, is that in the social sciences and humanities, and what I like to call the grievance studies industry, in academia, those industries have been giving rise to this culture of wokeism, social justice, political
I'm
correctness.
going to ask you to hold that thought. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Dr. Pat Kambhampati. He is the Associate Professor of Chemistry at McGill University in Montreal. Dr. Kambhampati, I had to interrupt there for a commercial break, but please continue with your assessment of, I think we can call it wokeism and how it's impacting in your chosen field of study.
Sure thing. So I think as we were discussing, the idea of wokeism, social justice, political correctness, cultural Marxism, all these things arose from the academic humanities between the 1970s and 1990s, and everyone left them alone until they started to come for the people in STEM. And that's happened in the last 10 years and especially the last 2 years. What has happened is the people in the humanities, as far as I can tell, seem to have some sort of jealousy of those in STEM and think that we are excluding other people because people in STEM are highly self-selected. As a result, they assume the worst intentions of us when in fact we in STEM tend to be the most meritocratic and egalitarian and fair-driven people there are, because what we want is to ensure the airplane flies. We don't care who figured out the calculus of the airplane and who figured out the nuts and bolts of the airplane. We want to make sure that airplane flies, and we can't have mistakes like that. So we in science and engineering and mathematics really care first and foremost about the work that's done. We don't care who does the work.
And this is the interesting thing. It's almost like it's a different, obviously the ideology is almost a different language because, their response to you on that statement would be, well, your whole system of science is endemically one of colonialism or one of white supremacy or whatever the language they want to use. So they, it's not as if they agree with mathematics the way mathematics is now. They're saying, no, that is part of colonialism. And so it's almost like you're speaking past one another.
I think that you are right. And I think the way that we can respond is by issuing a moral counter argument that we will not be silenced. We, the silent majority of sane thinking people who are not part of this cult, will not be silenced. I think that's the key step. We will not be shamed. And we will stand up for a difference in beliefs, a difference in values. And it is time to have a free market of discussion once again. That's what we need, is a free market of discussion.
So I do want to get into the impact of this a little bit further on innovation. But first of all, again, for our audience, how do you run your research? What do you look for in assistants?
That's a fine question. And what I look for in my assistants, my PhD students, my master students, are people who are interested in doing the work. The work is very difficult. It's very specialized. You have to care about areas of chemistry and physics and engineering. You have to care about math and science and building. You have to care about computers. You have to care about nuts and bolts. And if you're interested in these things, and if you might be interested in pursuing this task, then I'm interested in having you come work, not for me, but with me. It's an enterprise where we get to go out on an expedition together. And I'm going to lead you on this ship, and you're going to take over positions on the ship, and we're all going to discover new worlds together. But you have to want to discover new worlds and work hard. And if you're willing to do that, that's all I care about. I certainly could not care less about whatever your external criteria are. And I never have. And my group has reflected that. I've had 15 PhD students in my group and a handful of master's students, and they're from all walks of life. If you want to join the work, let's dig in and do some work, and that's all.
Yeah, and I guess flowing from that, what's been the response from your assistants and others because of these grant application controversies?
I think it is a depressing situation for a number of young scientists. For example, a number of my PhD students are young men, and more so, they are young white men. And what they are seeing is that they do well in their PhD studies, and they might not be suitable for faculty positions because faculty positions only go to women, underrepresented minorities, and sexual minorities. There are actual advertisements that preclude hiring heterosexual white men that are healthy. You can be a heterosexual white man if you're in a wheelchair, but not if you're healthy.
And this is what they're afraid of. We're going to continue this discussion with Dr. Pat Kambhampati after the break. Very interesting and important discussion. Dr. Kambhampati, I'm going to ask you about how this connects to innovation after the break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Dr. Kambhampati, you have spoken out because you fear that this attitude that you have faced by granting agencies will basically strangle innovation. I think those are your words. Can you elaborate on this a little bit?
Yes, I would be happy to. The idea is that in science and engineering, people, meaning the government, has funded science and engineering because it produces a good return on investment to the taxpayer. That return on investment to the taxpayer is to beat Sputnik, to launch men to Mars, to create cures for cancer, to create the physical infrastructure of the internet. Those are the innovations that arise from basic science and also engineering. Those are the innovations that are driven by like-minded people who are unusual, who are driven by technical things and not by people. We might have different interests in that some of us are interested in biology, some of us in physics, some of us in chemistry, some of us in software, some of us in hardware. But that diversity is different diversity in skill set. What we're focused in on is a commitment to excellence in research and innovation. And that commitment is what drives our economy and has done so through much of the 20th century. In fact, the Industrial Revolution itself was established by scientists and engineers figuring out how to harness the power of steam and coal to make machines work. So this is all happening by innovation in science and engineering that's only driven by innovation and not by who's doing the work. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. And so your takeaway point is if we start to rejig away from that and put other criteria in place, such as diversity and inclusion, then we're not going to get the innovation that we've had in the past.
We're not going to get the innovation because innovation happens from people who are highly committed to doing the work. As a case in point, not everyone wants to do science. Some people want to do medicine. Some people want to do business. There are very talented people who don't want to do science at all, and that's perfectly socially acceptable. But somehow it is trained in the encouragement and compassion set that people don't do science because they're being discriminated against instead of free will, differences of abilities, differences of interest, differences of any form whatsoever, even gender-based differences. Any form of differences might arise that might make people choose different things. For example, physicians are mostly female. Veterinarians are even more so female. No one complains against that. Right. So there are all sorts of situations where there's different breakdowns of races and gender based upon pursuits for all sorts of reasons that people are afraid to discuss. But humans are a result of biology. Biology matters, and we should take that as a consequence as well and let free will take its course and let people find what they find interesting and pursue it. But why should we force square pegs into round holes and then make the process of building the airplane or the Apollo rocket not work as well?
So what do you think the state of innovation is in Canada then?
I think the state of innovation in Canada is going to suffer, and I think it's also suffering in America. I think it's suffering in Canada in greater amount than in America. The reason is I think that Canada the current political climate has a greater interest in diversity, inclusion, and equity than America. So that culture and the culture of wokeism has taken control of Canadian politics in a way that's quite large since 2015, I would say. And I did not see this in 2010. I did not see this in 2005,
Right.
but it really seems to have taken over in Canada. And I think it's a sad thing. I hope that people can stand up, and I hope the regular people can say, what we care for is innovation and excellence. We don't care about who does the work.
It seems that there is a bit of a response to it. I think of Dr. Jordan Peterson, for example, and some of his writings talking about personal responsibility rather than being pigeonholed into a group think. Is that the kind of thing that you want to see?
I cannot be a stronger supporter of Jordan Peterson and Gad Saad and others like that. I think they have been doing spectacular work. I've been a supporter of them in public and in private, and I think what they're doing is helping strengthen the universities, strengthen culture, strengthen agency and accountability, strengthen individualism, and I could not thank them both more for the work they're doing.
And this was not a setup question. I want to make that perfectly clear.
I'm a scientist. We're not here to give people false pats on the back. I really believe it.
Fantastic. We're going to take another break. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Dr. Pat Kambhampati. He is the Associate Professor of Chemistry at McGill University in Montreal. Dr. Kambhampati, love to get, are you, after you sort of made an issue of this, and you spoke about this a little bit, but I'm wondering whether there are other examples around you that also worry you, that yours is not an isolated case, I guess is what I'm wondering.
Mine is absolutely not an isolated case. I gave a presentation at our chemistry department staff meeting this week to the other faculty members about EDI and STEM. I made mention of another Canadian scientist who's a minority man, African Canadian, who also runs a very diverse research group. His funding was also cut at the EDI section. So I'm not the only one. This is happening to other people. In my inbox, I have 300 emails coming in probably every few days saying, we agree with you, we support you, we're afraid to say this out loud, but thank you for doing this. And a lot of it comes from academics, both young and old, left and right, of all races, of all genders. I've seen people of all walks of life coming to me saying, thanks for speaking up, because we want to be able to support individuality and human dignity as individuals, as opposed to a collective group. And that's something that I hope to be able to make it easier for others to be able to say. And it seems like hopefully others are able to do that increasingly.
Yeah, I know. I think that's an interesting point. On campus, when I was on campus many moons ago, the traditional left were actually the ones who were advocating for free speech because, of course, they were fighting against an establishment that wanted to shut them down. Now we're into this looking glass world where, some on the left, not all, because there are dissidents who want to shut down freedom of speech if it's something that they happen to disagree with. So I think that's what you're running into as well, yes?
I think that's exactly what we're running into, where the people shutting down free speech and free thought and individuality are the extremist left. They are not the liberals, they're not the right wing, and I don't know, there's no extremist right wing people on university anyway. So it's the extremist left wing people that are shutting down everyone else in the middle, and even the liberals and the conservatives. And that seems to be something that's taken place in the last 5 years, really since about 2010. But it really came up through academic grievance studies. And I think these are the people to whom we should assign agency and accountability.
Very interesting point. This is not a trick question, but we've got a couple minutes left. How do we, in your perfect world, advance diversity while supporting the innovation that's important for our country and economy?
I think that's a fantastic question, and I would be lying if I told you I had a good answer to that question, because everyone else in the world has been trying to work on that problem since the 1960s or 1970s. And what I can say is that it's a complicated question, it's a good question, and the only way to progress it is by having people with different opinions and different values openly and civilly discussing things. We cannot have progress by a monopoly of ideas.
Do you think, based on your experience, which is, in your chosen area of expertise worldwide, do you think that, Canada is a fair country?
Oh, I think Canada is an extremely fair country. I think I was born in India. I grew up in America, and I now had my professional career in Canada. I think Canada and America are probably the two fairest countries in the world. They have developed, the world is not full of unfair things that are people trying to keep from you like a cookie jar. You have to invent freedoms and liberties, and those freedoms and liberties were advanced by the Enlightenment in the West, and America and Canada and the New West has really been a beacon of freedoms and liberties in the last 100 or 200 years. No one's perfect, but they've done a lot, and I think that's absolutely unquestionable.
Dr. Pat Kambhampati, I just want to thank you for being in my program. A very interesting discussion, a little bit off the beaten path for me to have this discussion. I'm usually a business and economics show, but I saw the connection between Canada's innovation strategy and what you went through. So I want to thank you for being part of the program today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Well, there you have it. Really interesting case study on, how this wokeism can impact on our innovation and really our success as an economy too. So I wish Dr. Kambhampati success in a very tough situation. Thanks for watching a very provocative program.